Hello! So finally, from a hairy bear, I look like a less hairy bear. And welcome to another episode of Fun with Law. Today I have Professor Gary, a world-renowned professor in emerging tech and law. And it's going to be amazing. First half an hour, he talks about his journey at Harvard and how he left his law firm partnership to pursue a career in academics. And next half an hour, he talks about emerging tech. And I recently co-wrote a paper with him. So we'll talk about that also. But please do watch it and obviously subscribe. Otherwise, I won't be doing these silly things that I'm doing right now. Thank you.
Arun bhai, say hello. Hello.
Hey guys, maybe I should start a podcast.
No.
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 Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Fun with Law. Today we have a very special guest, and probably is one of the most prestigious guests I've ever had. And he's someone that I look up to. He's Professor Gary Marchant of Sandra College of Law at Arizona State University. He's the Regents Professor of Emerging Technology, Law and Ethics. He's a Harvard alumni. He is a former law firm partner, and he's also the Director for Center of Law, Science and Innovation. And I must tell you guys, he's one of the leading authorities on law and tech all over the world. And I'm proud to say that I recently co-authored a paper with him that he was so gracious to be a part of. And thank you, Gary. Thanks a lot for being there.
Delighted to be here. Should be fun.
Yeah, and I must tell you that Gary, I have troubled Gary a lot. I think at one point of Gary just thought, Gary pitied me and thought, okay, let's work with this guy. Yeah. So, all right, let's begin. So what is your current profile and what is your area of work? If you could just give a little introduction to the audience.
Well, I'm a law professor at Arizona State University in Phoenix, Arizona, in the middle of the desert here. I lead a program, a center on law, technology, innovation, where we really focus on the governance of emerging technology. So I work across a lot of different technologies, sort of looking at how does society, business, and government sort of try to govern these new technologies.
All right. Also, Gary, you are a professor and you are top of your field. I mean, if someone wants to be a professor of law and technology, you have done it. Like, you've been there. So what is your life like? What is a typical week like in your life?
Well, it's a lot different right now with coronavirus, right, than it used to be.
Yeah.
Normally when, things are normal, and hopefully we'll get back to normal at some point, in the future. But it's a great lifestyle. I have a wonderful job. I do a lot of teaching. I do, 7 or 8 courses every year I teach. And so those are all law tech courses. And so that takes up a lot of time. I supervise a large number of students who, write papers for me. And so that's probably the biggest chunk of time, but I also am involved in a number of research projects and papers. I think I have probably 20 or 30 papers underway right now. So a lot of real diversity, and I like that. I do a lot of speaking and participating in events. I organize conferences here in Arizona, but I also speak at ones all across the country and the world. So it's a great life. I'm very fortunate to be able to do the kind of things I do.
Yeah. Gary, I was reading about you. You have close to 30,000 citations on Google Scholar. And Gary has a 36-page CV. And unlike my CV, it's not made up. It's a big CV. And so Gary, how has your journey been? Like, what were the 2-3 turning points in your life that, because you're my most experienced guest that I've had on the show. And doing it all, being in corporate world, being a student, being a professor, what are the 2-3 takeaways from your life that, that you thought, oh my God, they're unique to you?
Well, in terms of changes in my life, I had a couple major changes in direction. One was, for me as a young kid, I wanted to be a geneticist. I saw a TV special. My mother made me stay home from football practice one day and watch this TV special on genetics because she thought it'd be important. I was very angry at first that I had to watch that, but I got completely fascinated by the end of that hour of genetics going to be this big new thing. This must have been in the 70s and 1970s. And so right then and there, I decided I'm going to be a geneticist. And I plowed through undergraduate. I went straight into a PhD. And halfway through my PhD, and all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, I don't want to be a geneticist. I love genetics. I love science, but I'm much more interested in how it applies to the world and to society.
Yeah.
And to sit there at a bench counting fruit flies every day, 14 hours a day. And so this was a big changing point for me to realize that, what I had always thought my future would be, I have to take into account what I really am interested in. So I had to change gears and go more into public policy, into law. And that was a major change because I was on a nice pathway, and, it was all sort of laid out for me how my career would unfold. And suddenly I said, no, I'm going to throw that all away. I'm going this way, and going into policy and law. So then I went and got trained in policy and law, and I got hired by a law firm. It's the most lucrative law firm in the United States. I got paid huge amount of money. I got to do amazing work. They have, because they are such a lucrative firm, they only get really important and interesting cases. And it was just, again, a wonderful life. I made partner after only 4 years out of law school. I think I was the first person ever to do that at that firm. I was, again, on a wonderful pathway. My future was set. And then I said, wait a minute, I want a broader scope. I want to be able to explore other things. And so I decided to go into become a law professor again. So these are two major shifts in my career that really took me in a different direction, sort of threw away a very solid and secure future for something I didn't really know what I was maybe getting into. But looking back, I was so happy I made those choices because it was what I really wanted to do. And so now I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that and have that flexibility. And I think, I think a lesson for everybody, particularly younger people like yourself whose career is just getting started, is that there will be major changes in where you go. When I talk to people who've been out of, say, law school 10 years, almost none of them anticipated where they'd be now, right? They've all gone different directions. Things have just happened. Opportunities arise. And so I think, that's the reality of our professional world, is you have to be constantly looking, where does it make sense for me to go, and not sort of be trapped into a certain path.
Yeah. But Gary, you were also top of your class at Harvard, and and whatever studies you did, most of them were on scholarships. You made partner in 4 years. Now also, you have a pretty secure life, even as a faculty member. But you travel so much, and I remember meeting you in Gujarat last year, and looking at your life, it wasn't easy. Like you didn't stop working hard. So I don't understand what motivates you. Like, what is where you haven't achieved?
Again, I'm lucky to love the type of work I do. I remember when I left my law firm to come to Arizona State as a law professor. And the first week I'm there, I went for lunch with another professor who had been there a couple of years, who was also in a big Washington, D.C. law firm. And he said to me, Gary, believe it or not, you're going to work harder here as a law professor than you did at the law firm. And I said, that's ridiculous. I was working 20-hour days at the law firm. There's no way I'm going to do that here. And in fact, I am working harder, but it's all by choice. It's because there's so many fascinating, interesting, useful things to do. And so, I work very hard, but I love it. When I go on vacation with my family, they all think I'm nerd because I'm sitting there reading law review articles on the beach or whatever. But I love it. That's what I'd rather read than a trashy novel or something.
But, talking about the law review thing, I love your story about how you started the Harvard Journal for Law and Technology. I mean, that's some, you got, metal to do that.
Yeah, well, I wasn't alone. There's a group of us, several of us, and I was just a 1L, and a group of about 3 or 4 3Ls had been talking about this last year or two. And so we got together and we decided to launch this journal. And, I was not the leader by any thing until a couple of years later. I became the editor-in-chief, but I was part of that initial group. And it was very hard because the Harvard Law School was not supportive of this. At that point, they had nobody who worked on law, technology, and society. Today, they're a huge powerhouse in those areas, in bioethics and internet and stuff. They have amazing programs. But when I was there, they had nothing, and they had no faculty interested in this. And so they actually tried to stop our journal from forming. They were threatening to not allow us to use the word Harvard. They gave us no money. So we were printing our journal in the office of one of the first editor-in-chief's husband's work late at night. We go in there in the middle of the night and print off our journal. because we had no resources or anything. But, over
Yeah.
the first couple of years, we gradually got some donations. We
Yeah.
eventually got university support, and now it's a wonderful, successful journal.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was complete resistance by the law school to it.
Yeah. And, also what interests me is that you were also offered to be part of the Harvard Law Review. So not just that. And also you're from Harvard during the, I don't know what is to call, well, it was a golden era, you took classes with Obama. He was one of the students while you were there. And you were also, and I don't, can you tell me, see, I'm from a developing country, a student from a relatively new law school. So can you tell me how does it feel to be at your age specifically and see all your, batchmates and people you actually know being top of the class, peak top of everywhere, wherever they are?
Yeah, I mean, it was a humbling experience to go to Harvard Law School because there were so many amazing, smart people there. I felt totally intimidated when I first got there. The guy sitting a couple seats over from me had been a New York Times writer for 3 years, for 10 years before he got there. All these people have done great things, and they went on to do great things afterwards. Barack Obama was a year behind me, became president. But, so everybody there was very smart. But, for me, the problem was there wasn't a lot of people interested in what I was interested in. I actually spent more time across the river at Boston University because they had a center on law and technology. And so I would go over there every day and work on projects over there because there was faculty who were interested in law and technology. There was nothing at Harvard. So it was sort of a weird experience for me because, there's all these wonderful, smart people, but they weren't interested in what I was interested in, or very few were.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the last question of this segment, you're a student of public policy, and even I that is something that I excelled at in law school. Can you tell me, as a student of public policy, what is the biggest impact you have had as, so let me tell the viewers about Gary. Gary has been part of one of the, he's part of any major development that has happened, especially in the field of nanotechnology, bioethics, and things like that. He has been a part of it in the US. Someday, somehow, he was part of some report, or either he was some part of some regulatory authority. So can you tell me, Gary, what is the biggest impact you think you have had on the general scenario of emerging tech?
Probably, the effect of any one person is fairly minor, but, I would say if I had an impact, it's on this idea of sort of alternative mechanisms of governance, what I sometimes call soft law. And I learned this in my law firm. So, I'm in a big law firm representing big companies who are regulated by these regulatory agencies, and it was all sort of set how this works. And I was learning how it works. And then we started to encounter problems that just weren't fitting the regulatory system. And I got to work with some very smart partners who, as lawyers, thought of a creative solution of creating, say, a voluntary program that would be better than the regulation, but would deal with some problems the companies were having. And it was a win-win for everybody. And so in my last few years there, I got to be just sort of almost a participant and spectator, but it wasn't my ideas, but I saw lawyers who came up with these very creative ways to deal with, how we regulate cars or fiberglass or these other products, where the lawyer came up with a very creative solution that went beyond the current regulatory system that just wasn't working for anybody. And so that really, lit a light bulb for me, that there is this need for this creativity, and it should be the lawyers who are part of that in designing and thinking about that. And so that's what I've done a lot of my work in different technologies, is what are some alternative ways that we could try to govern these technologies that deal with the real legitimate problems of normal government regulation. Just doesn't work for these technologies that are moving so fast. And so this idea of sort of innovative governance approaches is what I've really focused a lot of my career on.
Yeah. So Gary, now that's the whole segment about the next segment. So the next segment is the whole development of technology, of regulating technology in 80s and 90s, because you say that you were actually interested in law and tech in the late 80s. You passed out of Harvard in 91, and internet was just coming around. So how was the regulatory approach regarding internet? Like when you were at the law firm, when you saw cases, did you feel like what to do?
Not a lot. I wasn't really involved in internet regulation. I was, I wanted to be a biotech lawyer. And it's only really later, that I started to expand and cover a lot of other technologies. But I will tell you one funny anecdote when I was in the law firm. I was on the hiring committee for our law firm. And again, we were a very prestigious law firm, so a lot of people wanted to come there. And one day we had this student who came in who had, straight A's from Harvard undergraduate, straight A's from Chicago Law School. And my job in the interviewing, I had a half an hour with him, was to figure out what field he wanted to work in. And when I asked him that, he said he wanted to do internet law. And I said, what? And laughed. And later in our meeting, we said, this kid is amazing. He's brilliant, but he wants to do internet law. There is no such thing. It's a joke. And he should go become a university professor or something. He can't come to a law firm. There's no such thing as internet law. What is he talking about? 1 year later, we were now the outside counsel for AOL, one of the first internet firms. Internet law was now our #1 hiring need. So this idea of internet law went from a joke in 1994 to our top hiring priority in 1995. In 1 year, it went from a joke to our top priority. And that was really, again, the light bulb for me. Holy cow, how fast things are changing. How can, the legal infrastructure, even the hiring adapt to such rapid change?
All right. So Gary, also one thing, what is the, what have you seen since you're into, regulatory work? How is the approach changed of governments while regulating tech in 90s and 2000s? For example, ATMs, ATMs were technically fintech, right? You could withdraw your cash on the way through technology, things like that. But do you feel under public pressure, governments are taking wrong decisions or things are going bad, or are they good? What is your take on it?
I believe, government is recognizing the limitations of their own capabilities that they understand, and we all should understand that they're a very important part of the governance of any technology, but that they can't do it alone. I came to this recognition when I was working on nanotech, and we had a meeting. It was sort of off the record, so I'm not going to give any names or anything, but we had every federal agency in the United States there in this workshop, about 30 people. And we're talking about how are we going to regulate that. And we ran around the table, and every single government official from each agency said, we cannot do this. There has to be something outside of government. We can play a role, but we're going to be very slow. We have to have definitions. We have to have test methods. It's going to take us a decade or more to really have meaningful regulation. There needs to be something else. You as academics, you as from industry, you have to come up with something else to fill this gap, because it's going to be too long for us to get there. So to have the government regulators say, we recognize our own limitations. We have an important role to play, but we can't do it all. Just drove home to me this recognition that there has to be more than just government regulation. There has to be other types of mechanisms out there as well to fill the gaps.
No, but Gary, when we see congressional hearings, with CEOs of Microsoft or Google and things like that, and the kind of questions that are asked, which are, I don't know if they're basic, but they're so fundamental. But all these people, they ask as if they're 5-year-olds, government doesn't understand tech. And sometimes when I look at you, I don't look at you as a lawyer, I look at you as a scientist first, because you have the capacity to understand the subject and then go about it. So do you feel, and especially in countries, for example, my country, so the solution to crypto assets, cryptocurrency was to directly ban it. Right. So what is your take on it? Like, how do we get better than that?
Yeah, so clearly, historically, law was people who didn't want to go into things like science and math and medicine, right? We were sort of the political science people. We were the finance people, so we didn't have the scientific expertise, and we didn't need it. That has totally changed. The subject matter of law is now technology. Every company in the world is now a technology company. You cannot operate as a company without technology today. And everything you do in the law practice is increasingly becoming technological. I remember, reading a book in the late 80s where Susskind from England was predicting, lawyers are going to use email, and people laughed at him. What? We'll never use email. But of course we use email. Of course we're, so much beyond that now. But this idea that, we don't need to use technology, we use our brain and we write, is quickly becoming outmoded, that we have to use technology in practicing law, and our clients and the people we represent are going to be involved with technology. And so more and more now, lawyers have to become technology proficient. The reason I ended up at Arizona State, I had no other connection to Arizona, was because it had sort of the first program on science and technology and law. And every law school I interviewed with, I'd be the only person. They had a program already. But now we're seeing, at least across the United States, and I know you guys are trying to set up a program at your university, your law school. We're now seeing basically every law school developing these law and technology programs. Unfortunately, most students don't engage with those. They should be part of every student's law school education, I think. But at least we're now seeing these basically in almost every law school, and at least some faculty and some students are starting to train in that. And I think it gives them a tremendous advantage. I see some of our students, when they've done a paper on blockchain or a paper on e-discovery or some other technology, are much more quick to get a job, and the employer will point to that particular topic as a reason they want to talk to them. And so I think that's going to be increasingly an advantage for law students going forward to understand technology, because we're going into a technological world.
Yeah. Also, Gary, I had one question. So, we have a lot of questions. We have questions like if an AI creates a painting, who to give the patent to? We have questions like if I have a driverless car and if there's an accident, who is liable? Can you tell me, in the last 5 years, in your head, as an industry expert, have you found answers to any questions? Because I have a list of questions, but there are no answers. So can you just tell me off the top of your head, have you found any answers?
That's a great question. I'm sure there has been. I mean, I think we've advanced quite a bit in terms of various technologies. I mean, we now know how to do email. We know a lot of the legal issues of email, for example, on jurors using it, on what can lawyers do with email and what they can't. And now we're moving into social media and other types of technology. So I think the law is slowly filling in. It's just about 10 or 15 years behind the technology. And so the problem is that the technology is moving so fast, and we have so many different technologies that so many issues remain unresolved today. But I think gradually we sort of fill in behind, and we start to get some stability, but it takes quite a while. The law moves very slow, and I think it's slowing down, not speeding up. At the same time, technology is speeding up.
All right. Also, just to ask you a very specific question, what is the solution for pharmaceutical companies holding patents for abnormal periods of time? For example, insulin in the US is a couple of $100, whereas in India it's probably $2 or $3, one small bottle. So can you explain it to me that what is the solution? What is the regulatory solution for that?
Well, I mean, to a lot of extent, to have the innovation in drugs, you have to give a patent, right? I mean, so it costs, $1 or $2 billion to develop a new drug.
Yes.
And you have to get your patent up front, because otherwise someone can just walk in and steal it from you. So by the time you get that approval, you're 12 or 14 years into the patent. You now have 5 or 6 years left to get, $2 billion. Now, it's easy for another company to come in and do a generic form of that drug once someone's already invented it and shown it's safe and effective. But to have those initial innovators develop the new drugs, which we urgently need for something like coronavirus, if they don't get patent protection, it can't be viable. And so it's absolutely essential they get that patent protection. But now at the other end, there's all kinds of gamesmanship going on. They try to use the word evergreen to extend their patents beyond what they're initially extended. Make some small modification, engage in various types of cooperative agreements with generic manufacturers to delay the generics and so on, all of which hurt the consumer and hurt healthcare. So I mean, that's where the focus, I think, from the legal perspective has to be in trying to prevent this gamesmanship to artificially extend the legitimate patent protection those companies should get. But if we don't give them that patent protection, we're not going to get new drugs. We're not going to get new vaccines. We're not going to get new diagnostic tests. And those are critical going forward, because we're at this very exciting period in medicine where the potential solutions and cures that are available to us are just absolutely astonishing. I think it may be possible in 10 or 20 years for most people to live to 100 in a very healthy way. I think that's what our biology sets us up to do. It's just that we have all these problems in terms of our exposures, our lifestyle, and our treatments that are just, not where they should be. And, there's just these incredible revolutions going on in genomics and proteomics and microbiomics and all these other technologies that are really going to benefit us all, but we need to incentivize that research because it's extremely expensive.
All right. All right. Gary, I'll come to, but sorry, I'm indulging in this question a bit,
Sure.
but but I was looking at one of the congressional hearings of a pharma company. So the CEO was sitting, and they had made around $1 trillion in the last. I think probably they had spent $1 trillion in last 1 year. They had spent half the money on buybacks because company can buy back their stocks to drive up the price, and and they had spent half the money on research.
Right.
So how does that really work? Because and sometimes when I look at US laws, Gary, and sometimes I feel like a lot of developing countries are doing a better job. Like if you think just regulatory perspective, sometimes it's a blunder when you see that.
Well, I have to say, from a U.S. perspective, and I'm not American, and initially I'm from Canada. The
Yeah,
U.S. right now, and the U.S. consumer is paying for all the innovation in healthcare. We're the only country paying for all that research.
yeah,
Every other country has a single payer basically and negotiates it down to just a cost and a reasonable return. All the innovation is coming from U.S. consumers are paying for it all. And so,
right.
yeah, it's a screwed up system here, but it's something
Yeah,
that every other country in the world is now riding
yeah,
on and piggybacking on and getting the benefit of us paying these, exorbitant fees for these drugs that, does go to stockholders and does go to profits, but it pays for the research that we desperately need. And
right.
so basically almost, you have all these other wealthy countries in the world, in Europe and Japan and so on, they're paying almost nothing for the innovation in the healthcare sector. It's all coming from the American consumer right
Hmm. Yeah, that's true.
now. We're,
Also,
we're helping with your health. We're helping you because we're paying for the innovation that's going to make you healthier.
yeah, I'm glad for that. But yeah, I don't know how feel I safe I feel with regard to the position now with Donald Trump.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
now
come to
so he has expressly said this isn't
yeah,
fair. We should make other countries like India pay for it. So he
yeah,
wants to triple the cost of your drugs and reduce ours. And
yeah,
maybe there's some fairness to that, but it wouldn't be very conducive to your country's situation. You're in a position where you're trying to rise up and having
yeah,
that additional cost imposed on you for your health care would,
yeah.
I think, be catastrophic for so many people.
No, but I also feel that they're in some of form reparations, the kind of harm that the US causes sometimes through the various actions that they take around the world. But I think that's a debate for some other time. It's
Well, certainly global
yeah,
warming is a great example of that, right? Where we have,
yeah,
historically been by far the largest contributor to this. We're doing the least
yeah,
about it. And, I think
exactly.
the coronavirus situation
Yeah,
shows us that, these issues that we get warned about by science and we ignore, come
yeah,
back to bite us. And the COVID-19 was much faster than global warming will
yeah,
be, but we see a lot of the same warnings about global warming, the long-term implications. And a
yeah.
country like the United States has basically stepped back and isn't doing its share to try to reduce that. I think that's just absolutely inexcusable.
That's true. Also, Gary, now last question of this segment.
Okay.
So I'm talking about before 2000s here. In the 20th century, what is the biggest regulatory achievement of in terms of tech? What is that one thing when you look back and see, thank God we did that. Thank God we had that.
Well, I think it's, how in the United States, at least, how we decided to regulate the internet, which was basically hands off, to basically use some other types of mechanisms like ICANN, a non-governmental entity to regulate and to basically, not put in place a lot of hard rules and regulations that would have
Yeah,
impeded that regulation, that technology. And so the internet was allowed to flourish because it was basically not regulated, basically given this freedom to expand and try different models and new applications. Of
yeah,
course, we're now seeing some of the consequences of that people got, greedy or sloppy or whatever with people's data. And people are now starting to realize that and say, hey, wait, we didn't agree to that.
yeah,
And so there's some bite coming back because of that freedom that some of the companies, acted irresponsibly or acted without the right foresight of how will the public view this. And so we're now paying the price of that. And, how do you, go back and sort of try to fix some of those problems is one of the issues. What should we do about data privacy? A huge challenge, right?
yeah,
Because, you and I, like, I'm not even on Facebook, but, people go on Facebook, they don't want to pay a fee for that. The reason it's free is because Facebook is selling your data. When
Yeah.
we go on Google and do a Google search, the reason it's free, this isn't some public service, it's a profitable company offering that because they're getting your data. So, do we want to start paying to use social media? Do we want to start paying to do an internet search? Or should we try and get some kind of understanding of, yeah, you can have our data, but you have to use it within certain bounds.
Yeah.
Right now, with the approach the US took is basically, anything goes, and that's not going to work in the long term.
Yeah, that's true. But Gary, also now coming into the next segment, the current situation and the future. So my question is, don't you sometimes feel, for example, we have an ICJ and an ICC, International Criminal Court. So we have to have some kind of treaty, I know I'm dreaming here, but don't you think there has to be some kind of an international court set up to get, because most of the tech companies, for example, India, most of the tech companies in the US or big companies are in Russia or Europe, they basically control our market. And to basically to sit in India and sue Mark Zuckerberg, it's impossible, right? Because sometimes a lot of policy decisions, the main leaders are responsible for that. So don't you think there has to be some international harmonization of law? And also there has to be an international court set up so that you can actually complain about people in other countries with regard to this.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, technology crosses national boundaries. We're seeing that absolutely, and the legal system has a problem struggling with that because our whole legal system of enforceable laws based on sovereignty, of each country having sovereignty, and so there is no real enforceable law at the international level in most areas. And so, how should we fill that in? The U.S. I think is very skeptical of some international bodies that it will be politicized. We're seeing that now with the World Health Organization, the U.S. threatening to pull out of that, which I think would be a huge mistake. But on the other hand, there's this sense that these international bodies become politicized, sometimes very anti-U.S. And so why should we be the number one funder of that if they're just going to, be used as a place to basically, adopt anti-U.S. policies? So the real challenge there, how you get that right balance to have accountability, credibility, but also, international harmonization in some extent. So I think, the U.S. has not participated in any international court system. And I think it'll need a lot of trust and better development of legal systems before they ever will. I mean, I think that's just the reality of the U.S. situation. So I think we have to look at sort of less dramatic steps and sort of enforceable courts of other ways for countries to cooperate and to, work together on, issues like climate change, but also coronavirus and, epidemic diseases and artificial intelligence and so on. So I think that is a huge challenge. It's an area I work in quite a bit, is trying to figure out what are some realistic steps that can be taken to try to have some kind of international coordination or harmonization.
Yeah, all right. Also, I will come back to COVID and pandemic. I have two specific questions on that later. But first of all, I would like to, I love your story about how you're working with a Japanese company, and one of the guys who would rather not sue the government ended up suing it because of the, can you tell that story?
Sure. So, we were representing Japan, sort of Toyota in Japan in an enforcement action against California. And Japanese companies culturally just do not like to sue generally, and certainly not to sue U.S. agencies. They have a culture against that. And the California agency knew that. And so they were basically sort of picking on Toyota as the first company to pick on, knowing that they would settle, as they had historically in the past when they're trying to affect the change. But they made the mistake that when the Japanese company Toyota said, well, we sent a vice president over with two assistants who wrote down every word that was said in a meeting with one of your chief staff persons. And we said, this is the way we want to do it. Is that okay? And your staff person said, yes. And so then they went ahead and did it that way. California responded saying, no, he's lying. And so when you accuse a vice president of a large Japanese company of lying, particularly when they have all the documentation that they weren't lying, and the guy in the U.S. agency didn't even remember the meeting hardly, that was, an insult. That was starting a war. And so they then would litigate, and they did litigate, and they did win. But, it was that personal insult and this cultural difference that the American agency did not understand, that you just don't go and insult a very senior, prestigious vice president, particularly when they were right and they had the documentation there, right, and call him a liar. That's just not the way you do it.
Yeah, but the reason I asked this question was because next question is regarding corporate greed and big data management. Because if you think about it now, corporations, basically today Google has the power to influence anything and everything, and if you, in India, we have 600 million users, and the first website you open half the time is Google. Then you go to TikTok, then you go to YouTube, then you go to WhatsApp, things like that. So do you sometimes feel, and coming from that mindset, of a law firm partner where you saw the corporate greed, going around, do you think that these companies will be ever good in the long run with regard to our data and things like that? Don't you think it is one day going to backfire like crazy?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So first of all, when I went into a law firm, a corporate law firm, I was just an avid environmentalist, a radical environmentalist. And, working in a large company like a General Motors, I saw all kinds of people who were doing far more for the environment than I did outside the company. There was very different people within that company. There were, the economists and some of the corporate people who just wanted profit. But there were, professionals and environmental engineers who were absolutely, convinced and had the conviction to try to improve the environmental performance, and were, emotionally committed to that goal. And so you had this interplay within the company of different types of people and different types of forces. And there was tremendous forces for good within the companies, as well as some force for, greed and even sometimes dishonesty. So you can't just say they're a greedy corporation. That's oversimplifying what's going on in these large institutions. So that's one thing, is that there are, I'm sure, and I know, good people in Google, good people in all these companies who are trying to do the right thing, who are trying to, be responsible. But they have this incredible power now, right? And, we've heard, absolute power corrupts. And so part of the problem is just how much power they have. And it's part of the nature of the problem of big data, that the more big data you have, the more you can do new things. And so it becomes sort of a natural monopoly, that the smaller companies can't compete, and increasingly can't compete. So they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and more powerful. And the smaller people all just sort of, drop away. And so that creates this momentum and this, trajectory that they're just going to get more and more powerful. So how do you rein them in? I mean, they do a lot of good. I mean, thank God they're there during this coronavirus situation. Could you imagine without that technologies, even 20 years ago, where we wouldn't even be able to do something like this? We wouldn't be able to teach online. No one would have smartphones. We might have an internet, phone dial up at best. A few people might have that. We would be completely, up the creek if we didn't have these technologies. And so they are doing a lot of good. And the question is, how can we continue to do that? I mean, I love that I can go and do a Google search. I mean, you're probably too young to remember what it was like when you didn't have Google, right? And you didn't have the internet. You had to look things up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was 10 years old, and it was very hard to find out information even back then. And it's now at the tip of our fingers. And, my kids today who are teenagers, I mean, they could never imagine living in a world without social media and Google and internet search and all these tools that have made their life so much richer and so much more effective and efficient. So we want that. We want to continue that. We want to improve that. But how do we put limits on their power, on their size and so on, to try to make sure they are respecting our rights and our data privacy and things like that? And so that's where the action's at, is like, what kind of, conditions or tools or programs or whatever regulation can we create that would put limits on them to provide the assurance that they're not going to misuse their power, but still allow these technologies to go forward? Because we're just seeing the beginning of what I think will be I'm a big technological, optimist. I got involved in science and policy because I believe technology is making a better world. And I think it will continue to make a better world. And so as we have artificial intelligence, but as these technologies get more powerful, their misuse and how they can be abused also goes up. And so we have to develop the governance of it in sync with the technology. And that's where the letdown has been. We just haven't been able to develop the governance systems to put in place the reasonable controls that as this technology's exploded. And so it's up to the lawyers, I think. We have a big responsibility to step up and figure out how can we provide that kind of assurance to the public that they aren't going to have their data abused, that their data will be protected, that the machines won't take over everything in their lives. I mean, that's going to be the challenge for the legal system. And that's why we need lawyers who have an appreciation and understanding of these technologies, both their powers and their powers to be abused.
Yeah, that's true. And also, Gary, one thing that I also noticed, especially in the last 6 months, is that these companies today, who have this tremendous amount of power and things like that, when the companies were being set up and built, they never asked for this power. Like, this wasn't the end. And they now just have it. And when you especially see congressional here, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, he looked scared because he never wanted this.
Right.
That's true. All right. So
exactly.
now,
it's just a nature of the technology itself, how fast it's coming, how power it is, and these basically kids who set up these companies are now some of the most powerful people in the world. And
and I don't think they don't want to be this powerful.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's hard to turn it down once you get handed it to you, but that wasn't the goal initially, I don't think.
Yeah. Also now, let me ask you something, and you worked in regulations a lot. There are some technologies which are not just capable of being regulated. For example, crypto assets, cryptocurrency, which are, brilliant technologies, but a small amount of it also can be used to defraud economies, and governments do not have the infrastructure for it. And they banned it, right? So in India, the approach was, okay, we'll ban transactions, things like that. And recently, the Supreme Court overruled it because it was disproportionate, the ban. However, when you look at that, don't you just think to yourself that just on, prima facie, if you think about it, don't you think the ban is right? Because if you can't regulate it, if you don't have the infrastructure, what do you do about it?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the big challenge. So we have these new technologies. We have these older regulatory systems that just don't fit these new technologies. In the United States, we have different federal agencies putting a cryptocurrency in 4 different boxes. Some say it's a currency, some say it's a commodity, some say it's a security, and so on. So, because we're trying to put it in these boxes that existed beforehand, we don't have the time to develop entirely new regulatory systems out of nothing for each new technology that comes around. So how do we do that? What kind of mechanisms do we have? So we have to have some kind of technology governance systems, both nationally and internationally, that can try to manage this without having to necessarily be locked into the rules of the past, but also, aren't just going to come up with these laws that stay in place for 20 years and become obsolete. So that's, again, this challenge of this more adaptive, flexible, nimble regulatory systems we need. And that's what I spend a lot of my time working on. I'm working on a project right now on artificial intelligence on that. On how do we put in place that kind of systems? What would be the tools and the parts of it that would make it, both adaptive and nimble, but also, responsible and accountable? So that's exactly the challenge we're trying to do. And, I was delighted to work on a paper with you on the international governance of crypto assets. We have an article coming out on that. Again, this challenge that, these are tools that can easily go across national borders, right? So the idea that we each just regulate our own little jurisdiction isn't going to work because you can just go around those laws. So we need some kind of international coordination, but we're not ready for world government. We're not ready for treaties or anything like that with that. We see in climate change, a huge problem. We tried to do a treaty. We spent so much time, so much carbon has been emitted flying to CO2, greenhouse gas meetings. And we finally got a treaty or the Paris Agreement where basically every country just said, well, do what we want to do. And the United States then said, we won't even do that. So, we put so much effort into that for a real major problem, and it really hasn't produced a result. We need something more effective. And so, again, when you look at artificial intelligence, crypto assets, what are the new tools we could use to try to make it more effective?
But being an environmental law enthusiast, do you ever feel powerless? Do you feel, what am I doing? Do you feel disheartened?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, when I see the U.S. drop out of, any commitment to climate change, but then I see, companies. I'm on a National Academy of Science committee right now on greenhouse gases from cars. And we've been going around and meeting with the different car companies, and those meetings are confidential, but their basic goal is we want to be zero emitting. We're committed to that. That's our goal. When I represented those same companies 20 years ago as a private lawyer, that was not their goal. Their goal was to defeat global warming regulation. So just a total sea change. They've totally changed their perspective that they now want to be the solution, and they think it's good business to be the solution. From opposing that. And so when I see that, I'm heartened. We actually are making progress, even if our governments once in a while go backwards and step backwards like the US government has right now. As a whole, as a society, as industry, I think we are understanding and moving in the right direction. The question is, are we moving fast enough? And again, the coronavirus situation is a real warning that you can't be complacent. I mean, because people were warning about pandemics for the last 20 years. We have to put in place preparations, and we just ignored that. And now we're paying the price. Every country in the world is paying the price because we sat on our hands and we said it's better just to put it off to some time in the future, and then bang, it hits us. And we're now paying the price, and and in all kinds of ways, and people dying unnecessarily, and people lives being restricted in so many ways. And so the same warnings are out there in climate change. It's just a more gradual, longer term problem. But can we respond fast enough? That's going to be the problem.
That's true. And
I think we will respond is the good news. I think it's slowly affecting not only people, the younger people, industry are starting to see what they need to do.
Yeah, and now coming to the concept of COVID and things like that with regard to law and tech. So one thing that has really emerged is the government, applications, mobile applications. I don't know if you've heard. So they had that big in South Korea, which helped them trying to cut down. So the application is the way do you know about it? Like even India has that. So you download that, and through Bluetooth you can get to know who has what. So now there are major privacy concerns because my right to privacy and the government's right to provide good health to their citizens. We have to balance that. And sometimes I feel that, they shouldn't collect my data. They shouldn't tell if I have the virus or not. It's my private information. But sometimes I feel, oh no, it's good. So that on my phone, I know where to go, where not to go. So what is the solution?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, there is this trade-off, no question, between safety and privacy. And, for example, in the United States, after the 9/11 attack, there was suddenly this, who cares about privacy? We want security. And then slowly privacy reemerged as a priority. And now we have this incident. And again, people are saying, privacy is not so important. The important thing is security. And so it is this trade-off, but I don't think it has to be a zero-sum game. I mean, I think with technology, with bright people, we can design apps that will not invade your privacy, that will not allow people to have your identity, but rather, that you as a phone are being carried by someone who might have the coronavirus, but it doesn't have your name, it doesn't have your address, doesn't have your identifying information. We can do that. I think the technology exists to do that. And I think, in some ways, I think it's really fortunate that this is coming after there's been several years around the world. I know it's been a big issue in India. It's been a big issue in the United States. It's been a big issue in Europe of data privacy being a real major concern. And so a lot of companies are trying to, they're sort of just like they did on climate change. They refocus their position. They went from opposing it to realizing they have to be a player in this. They have to protect privacy, just like they have to try to do something about climate change. So I think a lot of these big companies were coming to the realization they have to do more on data privacy. And then bang, this hits. So they're already sort of thinking about, data privacy is at the front burner of one of the issues they have to be concerned about. Sometimes it's a bit of a trade-off, but they are not, I don't believe, and I don't know what's going on in India, but, at least, when I look at the plans of, Google and Apple working together, one of the major emphasis of their initiative is to try to protect individual data privacy by not having it being identifiable. So it would never be tied to your name or your address or anything like that.
But funnily enough, so the government also in their privacy policy has stated that, your data won't be shared, but they have a very vague clause. They had, if necessary, your data will be shared. And number two, they have also limited your liability, their own liability. So they have stated that government is not responsible for any, that if their data gets leaked or things like that. So that is there. But now, coming to post-COVID, we all know we as a humanity will overcome this. Somehow we will. Like
Yeah.
probably, if not this year, next, we will. But what are the major trends that you predict in the field of emerging tech after this?
Well, yeah. So, clearly, AI is probably the most important emerging tech ever. It's going to be the most
Yeah.
prevalent. It's going to be every part of our world. We see this in COVID. That AI is being used for all kinds of things already, from
Yeah.
the AI robots that can clean a hospital emergency room without a human being exposed, to developing new treatments. They're using AI to do that, to developing faster diagnostics, to using location tracking to try to do that in a way that will protect your privacy. That's all using AI. And so
Yeah.
almost every problem we encounter going forward will be AI. And one of the big issues is, first of all, to make sure it works correctly, to make sure it's not biased, because it's based on data. The way AI works today of machine learning is based on learning from data. And we know there's all kinds of biases in our world, and that's the data that the machines are getting. How do we
Yeah.
prevent it from recurring that same bias again in the machines? And then I think the bigger long-term problem with AI is, what is our role versus AI's role? I mean, so, I was just reading this morning of the OpenAI Institute now has a site that will make new songs using AI. And so, they'll probably get better at it than human musicians. And so, do we want all our music to be made by AI? All of our novels, all of our movies, all of our paintings, all of our scientific discoveries, all of our legal work, then what's left for humans? They'll do the truck driving too. So, what is left for us? We dig ditches maybe, but eventually they'll do that too. So, I think there's a real question about, what is our role in this world? It's our world. We're in charge still. What do we want to make human, and what do we value about what humans do? I mean, the reality is a lot of humans do really terrible, grudgy work, and it'd be nice to be able to replace that and give them something more meaningful to do, a better life. So we want that, but on the other hand, we don't want them to be unemployed and not have a livelihood. So I think those are some of the biggest challenges with AI. I think there's really exciting future in healthcare. I was talking about that a little bit in the past, about how we're integrating now your genomics and your epigenomics and your metabolomics and your microbiomics and your environmental exposures, and realizing that we're each genetically and biologically unique, and we integrate these things all in a different way, and we can now customize and personalize our healthcare using wearables and all kinds of other technology advances, that we can really deal with a lot of the healthcare problems that are really limiting the length of their life, but more importantly the quality of their life. I see just a huge boom ahead for health and technology doing that. But again, what do you need for that? You need data, right? And so there's big data privacy issues. There's problems of errors and so on, and then could this be used to discriminate against you because of something you do or believe or whatever. So there's a lot of again, potential problems with that again, it's got to be the law, the governance that tries to manage those to allow us to get the benefits of these technologies. And then I think the whole crypto blockchain is going to revolutionize a lot of the economics of this world, of basically making things more efficient, more controllable, more individualized. Your medical information or other products you buy, you'll be able to know where they came from, know how which farmer even maybe grew that crop or whatever. You'll get a lot more choice and a lot more control in your own life of what you use or eat, or what medicines you take and so on. So I'm again very optimistic about our future technology, but there's so much power and possibilities there. But with that power comes also a greater potential for abuse and problems. And that's why the legal system really has to step up to manage those, or else we're going to head into a dystopian world.
Yeah, that was a very, that's a comprehensive, like I can just put that part and put it out there to go viral, because like you have summarized all the concerns that we have with emerging tech. But also, Gary, this is the last question that I usually end my podcast with, and you can refuse to answer if you don't want to, but what has been your biggest failure? You have been at Harvard, you have top classes, you have been law firm partner, you have been top of the game. What has been your biggest failure?
I've been very fortunate. I would say, my biggest failure is that, I I spread myself too thinly, and I'm constantly in meetings with people who do about that particular technology because I don't specialize. I'm a generalist, and so
Yeah.
I try to do too much, and so I'm often don't know what the hell I'm talking about in a lot of the meetings I'm at. That doesn't seem to stop me and from people listening to me, but so I think that's my shortcoming.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate, I probably made some poor decisions or wanted to make some poor decisions. And I think almost every time in my life I've done that, I've had mentors who have
Yeah.
stepped in and helped me to do the right thing. I was going to stop my PhD. I wasn't going to finish my PhD because I'd already decided I don't want to be a bench scientist. I don't need a PhD. But I already invested 4 years, and my professor sat me down and said, bear with it. You will benefit from having this accomplishment, rather than having an uncompleted PhD. Stick with it. I know it's hard, but you can plow through, and then you can move on with your life. And your life will be better to have this degree. You'll feel better about it. You'll feel it was an accomplishment rather than something that you quit. And he was absolutely right. I wasn't convinced at the time, but he talked me into it, and he was absolutely right. I think of times in my law firm where I was, made certain decisions on strategies or with a client and totally screwed it up, and had a senior partner catch it in time and avoid me embarrassing myself by, being there to look at what I did and to give me the wisdom. So, I just feel fortunate that a lot of the places I could have stepped off the track and had a major problem, I had good mentors. And so I think that's an important part of success for younger people in particular, to choose mentors who are basically going to be, look after your best interests and not just have you be a pawn for their accomplishments, but to really look at what's best for you and try to help guide you for what's best for your career. And I've been fortunate to have such great mentors throughout my career, and they've stopped me from a lot of failures I otherwise would have had.
Yeah. All right. That's a wrap. And I would like to thank you for being there, Gary, honestly. And you are really mentor, and I would like to tell everyone that I asked Gary, and Gary always replies to my emails. He's always, top of his game. I asked him, can he be my reference for internships? He said yes. And honestly, Gary, I don't know how to say that, but I feel very blessed that I have you in my life, to guide me. And thanks a lot for that.
Well, I'd love to have students and young people who are, enthusiastic and responsible and interested in this future we're going into, because we need a lot more like you.
All right. Thank you. So
Great.
thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
So